Hello, Bridge family. I am humbled and privileged to share God's word with you guys this morning. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the trials and challenges that we are facing here today. With significant challenge, there are elements that are introduced into our life that are coping mechanisms. We use adrenaline. We use a little bit of push it throughness to try and get on the other side of things. But once that's done, like we are today, we're several weeks into this whole situation, some of that starts to settle down. And where we find ourselves is coping with a range of emotions, ranging from depression and sadness all the way to anger and frustration. And that leaves us mourning things that are lost and also anxiously trying to regain control over things that we've lost and this feeling of stability in our lives. Now, if you're like me, you probably find yourself vacillating back and forth between these emotions all throughout the day on any given day. And this morning, I just want you to know that that's okay. It's totally normal to be experiencing things like this. Significant challenge stirs up a lot of emotions, and we all cope with those in different ways. My encouragement for you is to be patient with the people that you live with and that are around you as they try and sort out those things in them, and also to be patient with yourself. This morning, I want you to ask God what He's doing in your life through all of this and resist the urge to just try and push through it and get on the other side. If you're able to invite God into this moment and allow Him to do something unique inside of you, then when you look back at this time, what you'll remember the most is the sweet, unique fruit that God will produce out of this season in your life in particular. Well, speaking of challenges, years ago, I worked in an office, and I worked a couple desks back from this lady who once a week would take her shoes off and put her feet up on her desk, and she would take out of her drawer a pair of toenail clippers, and she would clip her toenails right there in the middle of the office. And every single time I heard the tink, 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 all I can imagine was a toenail flying off in some direction and landing in somebody's coffee or poking somebody in the eye, and all I could see is foot fungus on a desk that may one day be transferred to me. And it made me frustrated. It made me want to make those toenail clippers disappear. My question for you is, have you ever really wanted to get somebody back for something that they had done to you? Maybe it was such an offense that nobody would even blame you for wanting to get back at them. Maybe you feel a divine sense of responsibility to make the offender regret what they did and also to prevent future people from having to endure suffering from their behalf. Whatever the case may be, offenses are difficult to navigate. They can leave us angry and confused, and they can even cause us to question as we process how to deal with them, what is right and what is wrong, and how do we do that well? As we dive into Joseph's story this morning, I'd like to point something out. Joseph did not have the Bible. Jesus had not come yet to tell him to turn the other cheek, and he had not yet perfectly modeled what the character of God looks like in human form. Joseph had to go through a custom-tailored crash course on the character of God, and it was filled with pain and suffering so that his character would sustain him in the destiny that God had for him. This morning, we're going to continue our series on Joseph and the character of destiny as we see he has the chance to finally confront the people that have hurt him deeply. This custom-tailored crash course that he's gone through has prepared him specifically for this moment above all others, because in this moment, he is going to represent the heart and the character of God to a lost and broken world. Joseph will have to choose to either bless those who don't deserve it or curse those who have caused him so much pain and suffering. And today, we're going to talk about how a releasing heart does three things. First, it trusts God for justice. Second, it forgives. And third, it blesses the undeserving. So let's jump in. First part, trusting God for justice. We're going to open today in Genesis 42, starting in verse 1, and it says this: When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in sale for Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his other brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." He said to them, "No, it is the nakedness of the land you have come to see." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. Offenses are so difficult to navigate. Here we see Joseph immediately recognizes his brothers and the people who have offended him and caused him so much pain and suffering. And his first reaction is to speak harshly to them and throw them in prison. And I don't think at this point anybody would even blame him for all the pain and suffering that he's endured and the response that he gave. In fact, if you listen in there, his brothers tell him to his face, "We're honest men." Yeah, right, you're honest men. You sold me and you lied to our father, and you're telling me you're honest men. He's mad, and understandably so. So, how many of you guys have ever lately read something on Facebook or read something in the news that left you angry? Maybe you've been in the store and somebody has coughed right in front of you, or they had the audacity to walk inside without a mask on. Maybe you went to Costco, God bless you, and somebody parked so close to you after you came back to your car that you couldn't even get into your car. So you had to stand in the baking sun waiting for them to come move their car and learn how to park. My question for you is, the way that you seek justice, what does that reveal to God, to the world about God? See, a releasing heart trusts God for justice. Romans 12, verse 17 says this: "Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome evil do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Now, I love that verse when it says, heap burning coals on their head, because when I am deeply offended, the idea of throwing burning coals on somebody's head just sounds awesome. However, if you notice at the end of that verse, it says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This is the kingdom way. This is the way that God demonstrates his character to a lost and broken world. So the best thing that human justice can hope to exact when it comes to revenge is a balancing of the scales. You might be able to zero out the budget. You might be able to pay back offense for offense and balance accounts. But human justice can't change a heart. And human justice can't bring life from a dead situation. When a releasing heart trusts God for justice, it demonstrates the heart and the love of God to a lost and broken world, and it has the power to fully heal deep wounds. It has the power to replace hearts of stone with hearts of flesh, and it has the power to overcome evil with good, not just to destroy evil, but to actually turn it around and cause it to become a force for good. Second thing that a releasing heart does is forgive. Let's continue our story in Genesis 42, verse 18. It says, on the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined here where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified and you shall not die. And they did so. Then they said to one another, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, Reuben's the oldest, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you didn't listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. For 3 days, God tested Joseph's heart and let him wrestle with what he would do with his brothers. In the last passage that we started, it said that he threw him in prison and waited 3 days. And then this scene takes place. So Joseph, 3 days have elapsed. And if you put yourself in Joseph's seat, Joseph has his offenders at his mercy. He has the dream that God has given him, and he has to choose what he's going to do with it. And in those 3 days, you better believe there was every spectrum of emotion that you can imagine about what to do here, whether to squash them like a bug or to fully forgive them because he knows he's human and he needs grace and mercy just as much as anybody else. And somewhere in between there, he had to process everything. C.S. Lewis said it best. He said, everybody says forgiveness is a great idea until they have something to forgive. Now, maybe in your house, you're with people that you don't normally have to stay around 24/7, but now there are no rhythms for coming and going, and there's a lot less bandwidth for the people that are around you all the time, and somebody in your sphere snaps at you just out of the blue. And it's not deserved, or maybe it was, but it's just uncharacteristic. Or maybe in your house, you have a stash of Tillamook mudslide ice cream that is definitely sacred, and somebody ate the rest and didn't tell you and left you with no ice cream at night. Or maybe somebody called out one of your flaws in an unflattering way, and it left you feeling exposed or embarrassed. In those moments, it's really easy to forget how much that we've been forgiven, isn't it? Those moments have a way of revealing a rawness or an insecurity or a vulnerability inside of us that leave us feeling the need to cover over it or to protect it or to cause the attacker or the accuser to submit and no longer be a threat. But in Matthew 18, Jesus tells a parable of a servant that was forgiven a debt that he could never repay. He left his master's presence and found a fellow servant who owed him about 3 months' wages and demanded that his servant pay up. And his servant said, he pleaded for the same mercy and said, please forgive me, give me time, I'll take care of it. And the servant who had been forgiven the life debt said, no way, you're going to prison until you pay back every last penny. All the other servants saw what was happening, and they went and told the master. And in Matthew 18, verse 32, it says this, "The master then summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant, as I had mercy on you?' And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should repay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart." A releasing heart forgives others because it knows it has been forgiven a debt that it can never repay. The last part of a releasing heart is the blessing of the undeserving. Genesis 42, we're going to pick up the last part of our story this morning. In verse 24, it says, "Then he turned away from them and wept, and he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound them before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, and to replace every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them." By the time this story ends, Joseph does decide to release his brothers and to bless them. By showing God's love and kindness to people that didn't deserve it, he became a true reflection of God's character in this world. Matthew 5:43 says, "You have heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust." It's easy to bless people that bless you, isn't it? Blessing the undeserved rewrites the script, though. It breaks the natural laws because it's not natural. Life begins to grow from death, enemies become friends, and heaven begins to reclaim this world. We get to be called sons and daughters of God when we bless those who don't deserve it. So my question for you is, can you bless somebody who doesn't deserve it? Years ago, there was a situation where my father was deeply hurt by somebody. I was in a position where I was able to see the entire thing happen, and I had a lot of anger and bitterness toward the offender. And I saw how much my dad suffered because of it. One day, after some time, that offender showed up at my dad's house and knocked on our door. My dad opened the door, and the offender said, "I have nothing else that I can do. I need your help. Can you please help me?" And I looked up at my dad, and everything inside of me said, "This is it, Dad. Get him. Stick it to him. Make sure that they understand all the pain and all the suffering that they caused you, and don't let them forget it." This is that moment. This is like when God delivered Saul to David in the cave, and he had the chance to kill him, or when David snuck into Saul's camp and he could kill him. This was divine moment. He laid him out before you. Now go get him. And I looked up at my dad with his expectation, like, "Dad, use your dad strength and just squash this guy like a bug." And my dad looks at him and says, "Come on in," and invites him into our house. And immediately, my face turns beet red. I am so angry. And I say, "No!" And I just yell it. I just screamed it at my dad, "No!" And I start crying. And I don't know if you've ever been so angry that you cried. These weren't sad tears. These weren't like I'm so hurt inside tears. These were angry tears. And I'm everything inside of me, I just lost it. I become unhinged. And my dad sees me, and he invites this guy to sit down at our table. And he says, "I'll be back in just a minute." And he says, "Sean, come with me. Let's take a walk." And we go outside, and I'm shaking. I'm so angry. I cannot believe that my dad has invited this person into our house. Although I think inside, I was young, but I think inside I had this secret ambition that maybe my dad had this ulterior plan that he was about to reveal to me about how he was going to get even that was way more subtle than I realized, because I was going for the shock and awe, squish him immediately approach. And my dad, he says, "Let's walk." And he says, "You know, Sean, there are a lot of ways that I have wanted to be a better dad for you than I've been able to. My dad faced a lot of challenges growing up. He was basically immobilized from the time I was 2 until the time I was 14 with health issues and surgeries and things like that, and constantly recovering from surgery after surgery. And so I knew he felt this deeply. He said, I wanted to be a better father for you at times than I've been able to be. But when this person showed up at my door, I realized this may be the only chance in my life that I get a chance to truly show you what compassion looks like. I have received compassion, and I need you to understand what that means. And everything inside of me broke. When I think about it still to this day, it breaks. I was so mad. And I was like, no, Dad, no. You're doing this wrong. Go back inside. We can come up with a plan. This person does not deserve it. And this is not right. And my dad, I could see he also wanted it. But he chose instead to be an example of what God's character looks like in this world. And he said, if this is the only great father moment that I can give you, you have to have it. You have to see it. My question for you is, what would have happened in Joseph's story if Joseph had taken the route that I wanted my dad to take? What would have happened to the people of Israel? Would they have died in prison? Would he have sent them back to their land without food and they would have died from the famine? What would have been God's witness to a lost and broken world when his chosen people decided to treat each other that way? You cannot walk in the destiny that God has for you without a releasing heart. It's not possible. God is teaching all of us to walk after him, to have the kind of heart that he has, and to meet this world the way that it needs to be met on God's terms, according to the love that he has for them. If you're willing to let God teach you day by day through his word, then your custom tailored crash course on the character of God may look a lot less like the pain and suffering that Joseph had to endure, and it might look a lot more like like spiritual times of refreshing every morning as you open up the Word of God. This morning, if you realize that there are people in your life that you haven't forgiven, I hope that you ask yourself the question, what is the cost? What am I not going to achieve? What is not going to happen? How is heaven not going to be able to break through by holding on to this one thing? And also, how am I holding back mercy from myself that I know that I need because I can't let this one thing go? My encouragement to you is, believe me, I know how hard it is to forgive somebody who has hurt you deeply. But if you will hear the Spirit speaking to you this morning, there is a tremendous work the Lord will do if you'll give it over to him. And I just encourage you to trust him with it today. For everybody else, you are a representation of God to a lost and broken world. When we step out in faith and unexpectedly, unexplainedly bless a world that doesn't deserve it, we become a reflection of God to a world that desperately needs to see him. And you become this divine moment where heaven literally breaks through on earth and new territory is established. This is not a natural muscle for us. It's not a natural reflex to look for somebody who doesn't deserve to be blessing and to bless them extravagantly or to bless them in a way that they recognize that they're blessed. No other strings attached. I just want to bless you. But my encouragement for you is, if you're asking yourself, how do I change a situation? How do I change a heart? This is how you do it. Extreme love, unexplainable love, changes a heart. It changes a circumstance in a way that only God can. So as we step into this next song, I just encourage you to invite God into this moment and ask him, Lord, what do you want to do through this in me this morning? And how can I invite you to meet these circumstances in my life? Lord, give me a releasing heart so that I can walk in the destiny you've given me today.